Hey, welcome to the community of skeptics. Let's let the people come in the building. We got a powerful speaker. We got Dr. Andy. Our topic for the day will be religion, adaptation by natural selection or byproduct. We're also going to be talking about Charles Murray and the bell curve, and we'll finish it with atheists and humanism. And Agnosticism. I'm saying that right? Gnostics. Well, I always mispronounce that word. Well, I tell you, I'm gonna get it right one day. I'm gonna have to dedicate myself to that. So let's get up in the room. See people come through. Okay. All right. Man, peace to the chat, Taz. I see you, man. I see you, Mally 7000. Was good. Cedric Pseudo Killer Official. Man, thank y'all for coming through. Let's get the thing. Let's get it going, man. I see some of the pseudo killers on the panel, man. We're about to have a great discussion. And y'all know what it is, man. So let's first start this discussion off, man, with our sponsor, man. We get it going.
Hi, I'm J.L. Waters, and I'm the creator of the Oasis for Teachers YouTube channel. I create content for teachers who are feeling burnt out and need a refreshing and rejuvenating. On my channel, you'll find self-care tips, inspiration, and professional development. So if you're feeling burnt out as a teacher, please come and join us. In this game of shadows, I won't hide.
Bobby Banger from the block, seen it all raw tough. Streets of Baltimore where survival's always rough. Joined the Marines fighting for a life he could save. But back in the hood, he felt like a runaway slave. Started an army, not of guns but of wisdom. I'm a rock squad, truth the anthem, we ain't just a God killer. Bobby Banger on his path for the truth. Empower the people, give them wisdom as the proof. Black power rising, knowledge shines like a light. He's fighting for the future, ready to ignite. Selling drugs on the corner just to put food on plates, but deep in his heart, he knew he had greater fates. From the traps to the lab, he fights ignorance raw, teaching evolution while shaking up the law. The real black atheist is changing the game, waking up minds, never the same. God killer Bobby Banger on his path for the truth, empower the people.
Oh, man, boy, we got a powerful show today, man. Interview with an expert, man. Y'all know how we do it around here, man. Let me bring up some of the people. What's going on, Miss Tiff? What it do? How you doing? I can't hear you.
Hey, how's everybody doing?
Oh, we doing pretty good. How you feeling today, Sister Tiff?
I'm feeling good.
Okay, all right. Welcome to the show. Appreciate you coming through.
Thank you.
All right, man. Let the people get in here. What's going on, Cedric? How you doing, man? Pseudo Killer Official, man. What it do, brother? How you doing, man?
Peace. Miss Tiff, how you doing? I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Listen, I'm here to hear Dr. Andy. And we'll see what else happens after that. Peace.
At least it's not going to be my fault.
Oh, yeah. Man, we got a powerful chat, man. Alex Torres, man. Appreciate your waving support. Taj, how you doing, man? Gary, what's going on, man? Y'all pseudo killers in the pseudo server, man. Y'all supposed to be hitting that link. Y'all got access to it before anybody do, man. Let me bring on my esteemed guest, Dr. Andy. How you doing there? Mr. Andy, how you feeling today? Good? Man, good to have you on, man. We're going to have a powerful show, man. I know you want to start it off with a slide presentation to get everybody in the mood, man. And we appreciate you always gracing our panel with your insight and informative conversations. All right. So let me know when you're ready. We're gonna get right into it. Let me know when you're ready.
Yeah,
I'll put up the slide.
let's go ahead and you can go ahead and start, and I'll try to make the intro brief.
Okay. All right. 1 second. We got Brother Chilembe. How you doing, Chilembe?
I'm good.
To
How
the
you
killer
doing?
Christian. Hey man, you know we ready for this conversation with Dr. Andy, man. You know how we doing.
Okay,
Okay,
well,
Andy, go ahead.
all right. Well, first of all, thank you for having me. And here's how I'd like to start off, trying to, in a sense, give you a focus for the things that unify the pieces of the presentation I'm going to give. And ways of thinking about it are the emotional position or the attitude of what I would call gracious rage, or polite fury, or sympathetic seething. And I think this sort of captures, I think, how we want to feel about some of the topics that I'm going to present. And I was asked to talk about 3 things that may look not related, but I think this is just a start to try to connect them. We're going to talk about definitions. We're going to talk about the definitions of agnosticism, humanism, atheism. We're going to talk about whether religion is a byproduct or is itself an adaptation, and then talk about one of the most inflammatory subjects in science, certainly in psychological science, the book, The Bell Curve. Another thing that I want to do in terms of trying to show I think the connectedness between these things is to remind us of the present political situation we are in. I think everybody may have seen this, but if you didn't, you're probably familiar with the case of Daniel Penny, a 24-year-old Marine veteran who on a subway last May put a chokehold on a 30-year-old African-American, Jordan Neely, and killed him. And it was an enormous controversy, and he was indicted for manslaughter, went to trial, jury deadlocked on the question of manslaughter, and then found him not guilty on the charge of negligent homicide. And he was found not guilty. And I suspect all of you certainly know about the case, may have followed it and followed it closer than I did. But I think the important thing about there are a couple important things about the case. Looking at the facts of the case, I want to be clear. I think the jury's decision might have been the correct one. I think the concern we have is that something that was, any way you look at it, a tragedy, a terrible, terrible tragedy, was elevated by Trump and Vance and the MAGA people into Mr. Penny being a hero. And underneath this, you see, I think, again, some white supremacy, and white supremacy where it involves white, in a sense, vigilantism. And I think we want to keep in mind that the MAGA movement is basically based on an attitude that the government has helped minorities and women in a way that has disenfranchised the whites who have, in their view, built this country. So I think underneath all the stuff we're going to hear, there is, as I'm sure you're aware of, a continued strain of white supremacy, racism that is in there. I think the other thing that's important to keep in mind is that the MAGA movement and white supremacy is tied intimately, you'd almost call them blood brothers, with Christian nationalism. And we're hearing a lot about Christian nationalism. And I think people forget that, again, Christian nationalism is very much tied up with white supremacy. I think the most, obviously the starkest example of it is the history in this country, the substantial history in this country of groups like the Ku Klux Klan. So what does that have to do with my talk? Well, again, I think when we talk about the bell curve and what's at heart at the bell curve, it is often used in terrible ways to promote racism. And that always has to be kept in mind when dealing with this issue, which is still a scientific issue. And obviously, when we're talking about Christian nationalism, we're talking about Christianity, we're talking about the primary religion in this country, and we mustn't forget its uses for ill. All right, so that's what I want to put in there as a background, a sort of unifying purpose of this in talking about what may seem like disparate ideas. And I'm going to start with the easiest topics and end up on the most difficult ones. So I was asked to talk about definitions of humanist, agnostics, and atheists. And humanism really begins in the Reformation and the Enlightenment, and it may seem odd for us, but in those days, moral philosophy, morality, any kind of philosophical inquiry was obviously first and foremost through religion. And the humanist tradition begins back then emphasizing that, well, it's not just religion, but maybe the individual. The individual has social potential. The individual has agency. The individual can and has a right to have their own moral and philosophical inquiry and their own moral views. And it has a long, rich history. And in the 20th century, it really, I think you can say, took off. And it now is pretty much defined. When you think of someone who's a humanist, this is somebody whose emphasis, whose philosophical and moral emphasis is going to be on human well-being, freedom, autonomy, progressive policies, and the equal and inherent dignity of all people. Can you still see my slides? Because they disappeared on me. Okay, they're back. All right. And also an emphasis on human rights, free speech, progressive political and social policies, and an emphasis on democracy. And increasingly, humanism is a non-theistic humanism. And the emphasis is on reason and science rather than revelation. And that's how you want to think about the current state of humanism. And a really important point to go back to its origins is that, again, religion is not a precondition for morality. An autonomous human being has a right to his own views and own thinking and own conclusions about morality. And in the politics in this country, humanists have begun, like the American Humanist Association, have taken stances against the excessive involvement of religion with education and the state. So I think that's a way when you hear somebody talk about humanism or a humanist, or you hear about the American Humanist Association or some of the other humanist associations, this is the attitude, the view of those organizations and the people in them. So humanists. All right, well, what about agnostic? And I don't know if Marcus is here, but we were talking about that, I think, on the last call. And somebody who is an agnostic has the belief that the existence of God or the existence of the supernatural is either unknowable in principle or unknown in fact, meaning an agnostic believes that you can't say yay or nay to whether or not there is a God. You can't say yay or nay with regards to the supernatural, that it's not knowable in principle and it's not knowable in fact. Now, if you research this, you will see criticism of agnosticism, including that it's an apathetic stance or that it's a lazy stance, meaning an agnostic won't take the natural next step to the position that they're in. And I think there's a strong argument in that direction. I think obviously I'm of the position that you can, in a sense, you can take it to a point of atheism. This is one humorous definition of agnosticism that I saw when I was researching this. I'm not sure if there's a higher power, but if there is, they're doing a good job of keeping me guessing. What about atheism or an atheist? How would you define that? And the definition is that an atheist believes that there is no God, there are no deities, there's no supernatural, there's no life after death. It's pretty clear and very simple, and some would say very blunt. And another definition of atheism is a person who does not believe 99% of the world's religions are wrong, but believes 100% of them are wrong. Okay. And I think for me, there are a couple bases for this that I think are worth looking at. And I mean, there are many, but two that strike me is the crazy notion that God was sending himself to sacrifice himself in the form of his son to protect me from himself. And that's all a bit much. And joking aside, I think one of the really horrific things about Christianity that we tend to deny is that Christianity is a religion of human sacrifice. The sadistic torture and death of a son by his father, and I don't know about you all, but I remember as a kid just being horrified by this. But it was like all the adults around me seemed to, not be bothered by this at all. But I remember just thinking, this is truly awful. And it was always upsetting for me to see these bloody pictures and paintings and statues of a young man being sadistically, slowly tortured to death. And I think that probably has something to do with where I stand on all this. Now, another reason that I think you want to consider why agnosticism is maybe being a little bit lazy, and one reason you may want to consider why atheism has some merit to it is the following. And I'm grateful to Sam Harris for this. I think it's a brilliant observation on his part. And it has to do with children. And think about the children you have or the children you know who are under 5 years of age, your pre-kindergarten children, the ones you have, the ones you know. I just want you to get them in your head for a second. Picture them think about them. Or if you've got older children, think about them when they were under 5, and keep that in mind. Most of us have not heard of something called the U5MR, but this is something that is kept by UNICEF and other organizations. It's the annual under 5 mortality rate. Now, why am I bringing this up? Because 5 million children under the age of 5 will die this year. Okay, and science, medical science, is bringing the numbers down. Right, 20 years ago it was 9 million children, but right now it's about 5 million children under the age of 5 are going to die every year. If ever there's the definition of innocence, it is a child, and particularly a child under 5. You can't tell me there's anything other than a definition of innocence for that child. All right, that's almost 14,000 children are going to die every day, like today. 14,000 children under the age of 5 are going to die. Right, that's about 570 an hour. You know, by the time we finish our discussion this evening, probably, 500 to 1,000 children under 5 will be dead. Right, that's 24 per minute. Right, that's like 1001, 1002. There's a 5-year-old that just died somewhere in the world. 1001, 1002. There's another 5-year-old that died somewhere in the world. Right, so if there's a God out there, the God either chooses not to intervene, which means that God is evil, or that God can do nothing about that, which means that God is impotent. That's bad enough, but I want you also to think about the parents of those children. Those children that have just died under 5 in the time we've been talking about it. Those parents, those children are probably dying in terror and agony, and their parents are probably praying to some God, desperately asking to save the child. And in all likelihood, those parents are praying to the wrong God. They're Muslim or they're Hindu, and so they're praying to the wrong God, and they haven't had revelation. So by the Christian faith, they are doomed to eternity in hell. Right? So what kind of religion, what kind of God isolates billions of people in the wrong faith, right? Creates that situation. I mean, it's an omnipotent God. So a God creates a situation where those parents are praying to the wrong God. They've already lost a 5-year-old or under child. And because they haven't had revelation, they're doomed to an eternity of hell. And I would submit to you that should show you that the fundamental morality of Christianity is really obscene in the sense of morally reprehensible and disgusting, right? And again, in approaching our Christian brothers and sisters, we have to be graceful and polite, but I think there ought to be an anger in all of us that they are subscribing to what I would contend is a morally bankrupt belief that doesn't care about the most innocent that we have, our young children. So that's why obviously I lean on the side of atheism as opposed to agnosticism. All right. Religion is a man-made phenomenon. And I was asked to talk about whether it's a byproduct or it's a biological adaptation. I think it's an interesting question, but I think, again, the main issue here is that it's still, whether it's byproduct or adaptation, it is an artifact, okay? It is, in a sense, a man-made manacle. I'm of the opinion that it is a byproduct. That's the basis of the little book I wrote. Well, what's the argument? Well, I think the argument goes back to any good scientific argument should be as simple as it can be and no simpler. And I think the byproduct argument is much simpler, right? Let's take the eye and vision. That is clearly an adaptation. What are the signs of an adaptation? The non-random organization that solves a problem, that has a function, and all of its constituent parts support that function. So what is the eye? It's an adaptation that solves the problem of vision, and all of its parts, the lens, the cornea, the pupil, the optic nerve, all of those parts are themselves adaptations which help solve the major problem of vision, right? So if you're going to say religion is an adaptation, you have to show that it has non-random organization that evolved over time to solve a particular problem, and all those parts of the adaptation support the solution to that problem. So what would be the problem that religion solves? What would be the problem of survival and reproduction that religion solves? And I think that's going to lead you down a very complicated path, and the byproduct argument is much simpler. And obviously, I think accurate. So reading and writing is a byproduct of other adaptations. And it's a cultural byproduct. It's a creation of man. It's a cultural byproduct that utilizes other adaptations. We have the adaptation of vision. We have the adaptation of speech, solves the problem of communication. We have the adaptations of fine motor movement, which solve innumerable problems. And those adaptations come together in the cultural creation of reading and writing, which is a very powerful phenomenon. Something that's a byproduct and a cultural byproduct can have huge power and influence. And I think all of us would easily see the enormous power and influence that reading and writing have had on the human species over the years. And I think the byproduct argument is much easier, that religion is a cultural byproduct that utilizes all sorts of adaptations, theory of mind adaptations, the attachment mechanism, all the things that I and others have sort of written about in our books on the subject. So obviously, I hope you can see I'm arguing for a position of atheism, and I'm arguing for a position of byproduct being the explanation for religion. And if it's man-made, it's going to be easier to change. So a byproduct, again, is the simplest. With religion, there's obviously social and cultural transmission. That's completely different from the eye. There's a lack of universality. All of us have eyes. Not everybody's got religion. There's massive variation in religious experience, which again, I think argues for a byproduct explanation. What is the evolutionary function of religion? You really can't come up with one. Religion has a lot of social functions, helps bring people together, creates common enemies, mobilizes men for war, controls women's reproductive behavior. Religions have any number of utilities that have been discovered over the years, but you can't find a problem of survival and reproduction for which religion as something that all of us have solve. So I think that's the, one of the crucial arguments. There are also obviously modern alternatives to religion. This meeting is not a religious meeting. So there are alternatives. And if religion was a universal adaptation that we all had, I don't think you would see the varieties of religious experience which have, been across, human history. We know there have been 10,000 religions over human history, about 10,000. We know there are 1,000 different gods. That again that's more like languages. Languages and used in different books. Again, a byproduct. All right. Now, I want to just talk briefly about the third and most inflammatory thing that Bobby asked me to address, and that's the bell curve. And I think you can't discuss the bell curve without, first of all, going back to 1969 and Arthur Jensen's work. Arthur Jensen was an educational psychologist at University of California, Berkeley. And the Harvard Education Review asked him to write a research article on the effectiveness of early childhood education problems, early education programs to help improve the IQ and capacities of young children, particularly disadvantaged children. Obviously, many of them African American. And in his research, he came to the conclusion that the programs were not helpful, that you really couldn't show sustained improvement, and that we ought to think more about genetic explanations for intelligence. And that paper was published in 1969, and that created a firestorm. And death threats on Jensen, and had to have bodyguards. And this was, before the age of social media. And the study of intelligence and group differences in intelligence became absolutely radioactive. Also, and we have to keep this in mind, and it goes to being angry and furious about certain things. This is an important subject for research, but it has a long, terrible history of being used to justify racism. And it started early. If you look it up, there's the case of Griggs versus Duke Power Company in North Carolina that went all the way to the Supreme Court. And what Duke Power was using were some intelligence tests to discriminate against African American employees in North Carolina. And the Supreme Court, as early as the 1970s, said you cannot use these tests. And here's where it gets complicated, because IQ tests are reliable predictors of things like job performance and academic achievement. And there's a real clash between the science and the tragedy about how these have been used. So you already have the study of group differences in intelligence radioactive starting in 1969. In 1994, Richard Herrnstein and Charles Murray weighed into it with the bell curve. And this creates a firestorm. And it is probably the most controversial book, certainly in psychology, ever, and the most controversial book maybe in science, I don't know. But it created a firestorm. Richard Herrnstein was a professor of psychology at Harvard, and studied psychometrics. And unfortunately, he died in September of 1994. The book was released in October of 1994. So we were deprived of Herrnstein's response to the firestorm. The co-author is Charles Murray, who's actually a political scientist, and he's still alive. And my own history with the bell curve, I think, illustrates the problem. It created a firestorm. And so, I came to the conclusion just on, what publicity I'd heard was that, okay, this is, a racist screed, and I never read it. And then I think it was last year, a friend who I respect said I needed to read Murray's The Bell Curve. And I trusted his opinion. And so I had actually started reading it before Bobby asked me to talk about it. I'm not sure if I'd finished the book if I would have agreed to talk about it. But at any rate, I was partway through when Bobby asked, and so I plowed ahead. And I would encourage all of you that if you have not read The Bell Curve, to get yourself a copy and read it and see what you think. Because I think the firestorm blinded us to some merits of the book and what they were saying. And it's 850 pages. And they wrote the book in a way that you could read the summary of each chapter before the chapter. So you can, if you want, you can read just the summary of each chapter and get through the book. I would encourage you not to, but just to plow through each chapter. A lot of statistics. I do not know statistics. I do not know psychometrics. So I have no basis of scientific expertise to question their conclusions. I've been trying to read some of the criticisms as I go along, but you don't even need to read the criticisms. I think it is worth looking at the book to get your own opinion about it. And I would encourage you to look, just start at the beginning of it, which gives a history of psychology and intelligence research. And what most people don't realize is that the first 12 chapters, they used a sample that was by, because they knew they would be in trouble otherwise, of just white people who had gone to high school, and there was a longitudinal youth survey. There was a huge data set, and they just pulled out white individuals, and what they showed, I think convincingly, is that IQ had predictive value for some of the social problems that we faced then and still face. They showed in that population that people in the lower deciles, the lower 10%, people whose IQs were 70 and below, those were predictors for things like poverty, crime, poor achievement, abusive parenting, all sorts of things that, to me, they showed it very convincingly. And the best analogy I can have, it's as if they were showing that hypertension which nobody was paying any attention to, hypertension had predictive value in heart attacks, strokes, congestive heart failure, kidney disease, that an important predictor of problems was not being paid attention to. And that's the first 12 chapters, right? And so issues of race are not there at all. It's simply a homogeneous population, and looking at IQ scores and showing that the low IQ scores were clear risk factors for important social problems and needed to be taken into account in public policy. Where they got in trouble, and what caused all the furor, is chapter 13, which is where they deal with IQ differences in ethnicities. And I think a lot of people just read that chapter, blew up, and I'm not sure they paid attention to much of the rest of the book. But what I want to do, and I can't really do it justice because it is such a huge and important book, but to give you just some of the quotes from the book that'll give you a taste for what they are trying to get across. And they're very clear that inequality of endowments, including intelligence, is a reality. There's variation. And they knew they were being potentially, that they were potentially going to create problems with themselves. And whether you agree with them or not, I think one does, after reading it, have some respect for their courage in publishing, researching and publishing. I mean, they lived in a world where they knew what happened to Jensen. At the heart of our thought is the quest for human dignity. And if you get to their conclusions, I think you will be surprised, because they're actually very critical of liberal elites like me and a lot of my friends. And they talk about the destruction of neighborhoods, the not paying attention to people who may not be endowed with much intelligence, not having a valued place in life and a valued place in our society. Group differences in cognitive ability, so desperately denied for so long, can only be handled by a return to individualism. And so the differences in cognitive ability between ethnicities are there, and they have to be dealt with. And they argue for a return to a vigorous individualism, that you judge a person by the content of their character. You judge a person by who they are as an individual. Policies fail, in their opinion, because many are inherently flawed, because they don't make allowances for people's variation. And here they're talking about variation in intelligence. And so when they talk about, say, the poverty in the white population, they make a very good point that low intelligence is not taken as an important predictive variable. And again, this is just another way they say it more elegantly. Measures of intelligence have reliable statistical relationships with important social phenomena, but they are a limited tool for deciding what to make of any given individual. Again, they keep coming back to, judging people as individuals. Now, clearly, there's some wishful thinking for them, because they knew that what they were researching and mapping out could be used to justify discrimination, reinforce racism and bigotry. And again, the thing we know as IQ is important, but it is not a synonym for human excellence. Taboos breed not only ignorance, but misinformation. They went ahead and researched it and published it because they thought, and I would agree with them, that the taboo on researching intelligence, the taboos on researching group differences in intelligence, were not going to serve any useful purpose, and such taboos only bred ignorance, myths, a lot of misinformation. Another thing that they emphasize is that a trait that is genetically transmitted in individuals does not mean that group differences in that trait are also genetic in origin. They were accused of being, just focused on genetics. And when you actually read chapter 13, they remain, they don't come down on either side of genetics or environment. For them, they know and they show how low intelligence has social consequences, but whether the causes are mostly genetics or mostly environment, they remain, they say there's not evidence to come to an opinion at that point in time. And this piece was completely ignored. I never saw it written about anywhere. But after controlling for IQ, larger numbers of African Americans than whites graduated from college and entered the professions. So what that basically means is that if you just say, look at people with IQs of say 114, all right, in that population of people with IQs of 114, the percentage of African Americans that went into professions was greater than whites. I don't remember the numbers exactly, but it was like 6 African American physicians for every 20 whites. That's 6 out of 26. That's almost a quarter. For teachers, it was like there were 6 African American teachers for every 10 white teachers. And so when you actually controlled for IQ in the statistics, you could demonstrate, and this is in the 1995 and before, that more African Americans graduated from college and entered professions. You never saw this piece of there, and that's in chapter 14. You never saw that reported in the firestorm of critiques, or I never did, haven't. And they said this: they believed that you could face all the facts on ethnic and race differences in intelligence and not run screaming from the room. That was their essential message. And so they felt that this was a scientific question, could be addressed by the tools of science, and that it was important. Another thing that you don't hear in the firestorm of criticism is it wasn't just whites and African Americans. They showed that people of Ashkenazi Jewish descent had in that group had the highest mean IQ. Then the next was East Asians, so it'd be Japanese, Koreans, Chinese, then whites, then African Americans. So they weren't just looking at differences in whites and African Americans. You don't see that in the criticisms. But the bottom line is, when you think about the bell curve, I would, pause and considering taking the time and making the effort to get the book, look at it, and see what your own judgments are about what's useful in the book and what is and continues to be, unfortunately, harmful about the book. So, enough of me. Thank you very much for, again, the invitation and for listening to the intro.
Man, we right here. This is going to be a great discussion. based off your slide presentation. We appreciate that. And yeah, man, let's go ahead and get it in. It seems like we're going to start with the last thing you said. So based off your critique of the work, where were you in agreement or disagreement with it? What parts did you agree with? What parts did you disagree with? I just like to get straight to that.
Okay. Well, the parts that I agreed with were, I think they did a useful service in showing that intelligence, IQ, had predictive value for social, what you want to call them, social phenomena, social ills that we face as a society. So if low IQ is a predictive factor for poverty, crime, bad parenting, and various things, then that means you should be researching ferociously, what the determinants of IQ are and trying to intervene. Just because we hadn't found successful interventions in 1969 when Jensen did his work doesn't mean they're not out there. And it doesn't have to be genetics or environment. It can be both. And just to give you some examples, we now know that, taking care of lead poisoning, lead paint is crucial. That affects IQ. 1 out of 3 people in the world are deficient in iodine. Correcting that, I can never say it correctly, iodinizing salt will help improve IQ. We now know, for instance, one other thing that's interesting, look it up, is something called the Flynn effect. We know that IQs in general have been increasing over the last 100 years. Every group IQ has been increasing. What's going on there? And the evidence suggests that prenatal, perinatal nutrition is crucial. Right? So we ought to be having programs that really focus hard on perinatal nutrition, particularly in communities of poverty. So I think if you look at chapters 1 through 12, I think they're doing us a service. They're showing how we've ignored IQ. And as I said, the analogy I had, it was so strong that it's like we've ignored hypertension as a risk factor for cardiac disease. So that's what I agree with. I think chapters 1 through 12 served a useful function. I think once they got into, ethnic and racial differences in IQ, I can admire their willingness to wade into it, but I think they were naive about the firestorm it would cause and the ways that it could be used to justify discrimination. They say they're aware of the problem, but I don't think I'm not sure they paid enough attention to what had happened between Jensen and when they published.
So let me ask my last question. The people on the panel, some of the pseudo killers asked the question. So are we saying that, based off what I'm hearing that across populations, period, the things you just mentioned, described in those first, 10 chapters, will go for everybody if they run into those factors? Just like high blood pressure. If you have those circumstances, then your potential for having high blood pressure would be there. So that's basically what those couple chapters was basically kind of wrapping up.
That's the implication. Yeah, that's the implication, that they did it for whites, and so they're saying, this is important and would probably be true. And I think they do, and they do analyze it in other communities too. I think including African American communities. But the importance of chapters 1 through 12 is identifying low IQ as a risk factor for a lot of social problems, and that's important for policy decisions.
So the mission. Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead, please.
So the misuse of it would say that the African American population, because we understand scientific racism, they was basically saying that we had no intelligence and we were unable to learn. So that bell curve could be a tool or instrument to kind of back that up and support that.
Yeah, and not just could be, it is.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think the case that made it all the way to the Supreme Court. I think the the ethnic and racial differences in mean IQ of a group could be used to discriminate against individuals. And it has been, and that's terrible.
Okay. All right, where you at? Pseudo Killers, what? Slim Bay, Miss Tiff, Juju, somebody jump in. I don't want to hog up the show. Sosa, how you doing, brother Sosa? Well, y'all quiet as a mouse.
Yeah, you hear me good? I had to pull over my car and pull off the side of the road. Yeah, how you doing, Dr. Andy? Good lecture.
Thank you.
I one of the issues with Murray was who he received his funding from. That also brought him a lot of flack. Can you hear me?
I missed just the funding jump. I didn't.
Yeah, the people that actually funded him, like Richard Lynn, he's like the self-proclaimed scientific racist. And yes, and I think it was a group called the Pioneer Fund.
The Pioneer Fund, yeah. No, I think that's very problematic.
Yeah, and I think, and two, he was, one of his main arguments too was that it was like he didn't account for the Flynn effect. The Flynn effect, I think he actually coined the term Flynn effect by James Flynn, but that was discovered after after Murray. So that was one thing that went against his premise, so to speak, because he thought that it was fixed. But the Flynn effect showed that, well, if what you're saying is fully correct, then how can you explain the Flynn effect? And that brought a little conundrum into his thinking and what he was talking about at the time. But I think that's what got Murray in trouble, and some of the type of policies that he wanted to push through that would made him controversial.
Yeah, no, I would agree with you. There are problems with the funding and some of the other people doing the research and the Flynn effect. But here's where I think we get. So if the Flynn effect is there, all right, are certain populations increasing at greater rates than others? I mean, if you and I applied for a grant to study group differences, racial and ethnic differences in IQ, we'd have a lot of problems. And I mean, it's become so radioactive that it's very hard for anybody to do research in it. That's my understanding. I mean, it's still so inflammatory and radioactive that it's hard. And I think that's why we need to be angry about this. Is okay, the bell curve created all this controversy. Let's keep researching it. Let's keep at it. And just to give you one example of why I think it's important is there's a group, I think the main researcher is Daniel Cochran, that has done some fantastic research on why people of Ashkenazi Jewish descent have high IQs, and it's a I think utterly fascinating piece of research, and they showed that it's because of genetic variations in these sphingolipids, and if you have two copies of the genes, you get quite ill. The illnesses in the Ashkenazi Jewish population, Tay-Sachs disease, Gaucher's disease, Niemann-Pick disease, which are terrible brain diseases. it turns out is something like sickle cell anemia. If you've got, just one of the genes for sickle cell anemia, you have protection against malaria. You have both copies, you get sickle cell anemia, which is terrible. And Cochrane in his group showed that it looks like genes for the sphingolipids and genes for some DNA repair mechanisms may account not just for the diseases in the Jewish population, but may account for the higher average IQ. The sphingolipids enhance neuronal connectivity. And so why are we not doing, ferocious research on the neuroscience of intelligence? Because, that will be useful. And it's become too radioactive.
Yeah. I think it just might be too soon. On the heels of, I think, with eugenics and all the atrocities that went on with that, I think so. I think in time we'll get better, but I think, especially at 90, I think in 94, that's not very long. That's like, you're like less than a quarter century from MLK and all those instances going on right there. So it's still a hotbed. So I think probably in time it'll gravitate towards a more comfortable space to do that type of work. But wasn't there an issue also with using that data across racial lines, like how that can be problematic because you can't properly account for socioeconomic factors? And
they try to in the first 12 chapters they try to apply socioeconomic factors, education. I mean, they try to anticipate, at least my reading of it. But again, you got to keep in mind, I am not a psychometrician. Statistics almost kill me. But my reading of it was that they did try to anticipate that and look at the impact of socioeconomic status, education. And that's how they come to the conclusion that it's not just socioeconomic status, that IQ and intelligence was a separate factor. But I want to get back to what you said just a minute ago, where you said that we may need more time. I think you may be right. I mean, if I step back from it, it's still too hot to handle, and I may be the naive one here. It may be wishful thinking on my part that we can wade into this again. I think because I've been reading about it and researching it on my own, that I've gotten angry that we're not doing research and wading into it. But am I the naive one here? And is it going to be used adversely against groups? African Americans, minorities, immigrants. I may be the foolish one here.
That's interesting. We got a super chat from Brass. He said, awesome job for bringing Andy back. Much needed information for the community. Much success in the new year. The PK from Tribe Media Innovations, man. Appreciate that donation. Appreciate that. Appreciate your support. So Andy, so am I correct in characterizing the bell curve as being pseudoscientific?
As what?
It's being pseudoscientific.
No, I think that's incorrect. I mean, they use the best statistic. My impression is they use the best statistical science at the time. And Herrnstein was a noted psychometrician, so I think it's scientific, but that doesn't mean their methodology is not open to criticism and their findings are not open to criticism. But I think it should not be called pseudoscientific.
How about the application of it?
Well, I think that's where the problems arise. But if you apply it, in my view, if you apply it to trying to research now the neuroscience of intelligence, then you have the hope of finding some things that allow for intervention, like, reducing lead poisoning, iodinizing salt, I think choline turns out to be a factor. So and we're also, we're also in the area of CRISPR technology, where we may be able to intervene at a genetic level. So if we identify certain things that are significant genetic contributors to defects in cognitive ability, wouldn't we want the opportunity to research possible correctives? And if certain groups are more vulnerable to them, we would want that. I mean, I correct me if I'm wrong here, but there's a particular drug right now that works more effectively in African Americans with hypertension than other groups, so that it's focused on a group.
Yeah. Well,
But-
I'll add the
but-
correction. That's actually not scientific right there. I know that's not actually a field, but what they found was that African Americans would benefit more from those groups, from those medicines that wasn't actually race based. I could put up the study and
Okay. Then I'm wrong on that.
Okay. All right. Yeah, can I get somebody else to jump in? Where you at, Ms. Tiff?
So,
Slim Bay?
so Dr. Andy, appreciate it so far. It's been very interesting. One of the things that was concerning with me in the bell curve was the idea of dice genetics, which is the idea that having things like immigration and sexual selection influences and downplays uh, the IQ of America as a whole.
Yeah.
Right? That has found out to be false, which is part of the Flynn effect, that it actually wasn't occurring. That was one of the issues that I found with the bell curve. And then the other is that some of the studies that they pulled from have been through the peer review process rejected for faulty data.
Well, no, you dug more deeply into some of the things than I did. But I'm glad that's a good point to raise up the stuff that Murray was talking about in terms of dysgenic effects on America and immigration. And I think again, to link it to what I said originally, I don't know if you followed this dust up between Musk and the MAGA people about immigration and accelerating H-1 visas for immigrants that smart immigrants that could go to Silicon Valley and take over coding jobs. But that falls into the line of discriminating based on intelligence.
They want to know too what high blood pressure drug was that? What's the name of it? Chat wanted to know. If anybody's familiar with it.
Yeah, I'll find it. I'll find out which one. I'll put a link in the chat for him.
All right.
So that was something like concern. I think there's some valid points in looking at the role of genetics in intelligence, but I think we ought to definitely take some very, very. I think we should draw a line and make some very good parameters surrounding that. And let me tell you why. What I see, right? We tend to find that one is that, as you mentioned on previous shows, Africa, the most diverse continent, hasn't been the focal point on a lot of these genetic studies. And so where in some environments a trait may be maladaptive, in other environments it may not be. Right? So you talked about this study that came out of Pennsylvania.
The echo. I missed the last couple sentences. The echo. If you don't mind repeating.
Sure. we talked about that study in Pennsylvania that came out of the University of Penn, in which you mentioned that there's a line in there where they may have thought that a specific genetic trait was the cause of the disease, and they found it or something like that in Africa, in which it didn't manifest that way. But my point to that is that large portions of the world's population hasn't had enough genetic testing and study done that you can make a fair comparison.
Okay.
So if you're looking at genetic traits maybe in America, we may show some maladaptive or some things like that, but in other environments, those traits wouldn't necessarily show that way, or could possibly show that way, which brings in the social economic factors.
Yeah. Well, I think that even the behavioral geneticists, will say, all traits are partially heritable, but the operative word there is partially. There's no trait that is fully heritable by genes. I mean, there's always genes and environment. Even in identical twins, the correlation only gets up to like 70 or 80%. So there's always going to be environmental influences.
Right. Also, there's some things like the marshmallow test.
Mm-hmm.
That's another one where they've taken that study, they've looked at it, they found certain genetic variations that may increase a child's ability to, I forget the term they use, but it's like sustain themselves from actually eating a marshmallow. And then they
Yeah.
have classes that are designed, structured in there, and you find that the correlation becomes equal. So that's the other part that I thought that Murray and them kind of left out in some of those studies. And I think the one you was talking about with the nurses coming into prenatal care and after they're first born, like those things are the things that I find that kind of like slip through the curve with that book.
I didn't catch the last thing. The prenatal care. The echo blocked out.
Okay, yeah, you remember we was talking about the anatomy of violence or something,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
in there he talks about how they did that study with the nurses going into these high risk factor homes, and they had the prenatal care. Then after the
Yeah.
child was born, they continue, and how that had such a significant effect
Yeah.
on not only the violence but the outcome of the children.
No, thank you for reminding me of that. I think that's a great connection. I mean, all that work in the anatomy of violence showing the prenatal interventions had huge impact on those adult risks for violence. I mean, if you've got it there, it's going to be in other things too, like cognitive ability.
Yeah, so
The other
those are
thing,
just
I'm sorry.
no. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, well, the other thing I think that's important for African American audiences is in the debates about this is that intelligence is originally and to the current day African intelligence. Okay, we evolved in Africa for millions of years. Okay, and so what is intelligence, which is referred to as the G factor, the ability to deal with complexity, that is of African origin. Intelligence is fundamentally African intelligence. And if you want to read something interesting, look at Steve Pinker's book on rationality. He opens it with describing hunters in the Kalahari and makes the case that intelligence and rationality came out of our long evolutionary history as hunter-gatherers. and that the ability to successfully hunt is the ability to deal with complex situation that's constantly changing and be able to think your way through complexity in the moment.
Yeah, it's a good book too. Starts with the Koi song, how to get the Koi song, driving how to. Yeah, that's a good book too.
Yeah, but I think everybody, leaves out the fact that and not only is intelligence the G factor of African origin, but they actually went and gave IQ tests to, and I think this is actually in the bell curve. They went and they gave IQ tests to hunters in, like the Bushmen of the Kalahari, and the best hunters had the highest IQ, which is, again, I think a nice symmetry.
Run it back again. Say that again.
That I think it's in the bell curve.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing on rationality and human intelligence arising from our eons as hunters and hunter-gatherers is in the opening of Steve Pinker's book, Rationality, right? And I think it's in the bell curve somewhere that they gave IQ tests to some, hunters in Africa, and it turned out that the best hunters had the highest IQ tests. I just found that a nice, closing of the loop.
That's interesting right there.
Yeah, but I think you have to take the position that, intelligence that all of us, regardless of ethnicity, carry, is African intelligence, is intelligence that evolved on the, on the plains and the savannas of Africa for millions of years.
All right. So basically, anybody else want to join in conversation? Cedric, Juju, or you busy arguing with an invisible man? I ain't even gonna say his name because he make up so much stuff and he's toying around with our intelligence. I'm not even gonna allow him to do that.
No, I got family, so I'm enjoying family. Yeah, so I didn't really get a chance to prepare for this. However, we did a lot of talking in the Discord, so I'm settled on how we feel about the bell curve. I mean, we went up and down. I'm usually more of a proponent for other ways to combat certain like societal dysfunctions versus jumping to something that dictate intelligence. Plus, we do know that people misinterpret the data in the bell curve. Not so much misinterpret the bell curve, but misinterpret that data about, intelligence and genetics or whatnot, which can be very tricky. It could swing. I mean, we talked about Richard Lynn, you feel me, and his cold theory. And we also talked about Dr. Cress-Welsing and, her theory and how we figured out that she was actually responding to his cold theory. However, I was going to ask, are there any better ways to determine, like people say, well, that's a determining factor. Do you think that there are other ways to determine certain things like criminality or, certain dysfunctions that people will have, learning disabilities and whatnot, instead of going straight to like this genetics and intelligence, if I'm making my point clear?
Yes, no, I think again, what's missed in Murray and Herrnstein is that they were saying it's not all genetics, it's not all environment. They were saying it's both. I mean, it's like calculating the area of a rectangle. You need both length and width It's nature and nurture. It's genetics and environment. And I think their point of, it shouldn't be a taboo topic is important. And I think if it's a if it's a risk factor for, if low intelligence is a risk factor for crime, if a low intelligence is a risk factor for bad parenting, if low intelligence is a risk factor for poverty, then I think it seems to me we're morally obligated to research it and to do everything we can to understand it and to see if we can intervene. At the same time, you are, what you were saying, you are also trying to intervene at environmental levels. You are trying to provide housing. You're trying to provide a basic income. You're trying to make sure there's no, lead paint. You're trying to make sure there's no asbestos. You're trying to make sure there's electricity, clean water. You're trying to make sure that, the factors that we know enhance cognitive ability are put in place. That's the thing. I don't think it's either or, and I think genetics and intelligence has become so radioactive for good reason.
Mm-hmm.
That I think we need to try to find a way back into researching it and talking about it and trying to do everything we can.
Yeah, I agree. And for the listening audience, that drug was.
But I just don't think I mean, if for all the problems that are in the bell curve,
Mm-hmm.
I don't think we want to throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Understood.
I think there's some important things there. And I for one found their critique of liberal elites and the conclusions quite, and their talk about destruction of neighborhoods. Number one, I was surprised because that's now, my prejudice against Herrnstein and Murray. I was surprised when I read that. Thought, well,
yeah, that's environmental racism. When you go through things like that, they call it environmental racism when you're dealing with issues that you were just speaking on.
Okay, okay. Well, I'm not following you.
When you were saying about the neighborhoods being dilapidated, some of that goes to environmental racism, like where they are, having abundance of project complexes, having an abundance of like liquor stores on each corner. Like if you go into other upper echelon neighborhoods, you don't have certain things as prevalent.
Okay, well, I may be blind here to something that's important. That what they were advocating, you would think was racist.
So it's kind of like it's more into like gentrification. This is not a Juju's class. I want you to have it, but so those are the type of things that we work on. Because granted, if a child has developmental disabilities or a certain type of learning disabilities, we can always find areas where they can thrive and become useful members of society. We never dealt with that. So I usually draw the line more to understanding how you can help a person become a better person, right? How we can diagnose their traumas, how we can get them sufficient help for that, so they can become better, so they can have space and room even in their own heads, to grasp different skills that would be beneficial to them in their lives.
And I wouldn't have said this before reading the bell curve, but they're talking about, at least it seemed to me, what you're saying, which is you deal with people as individuals. You find out what the individual needs and you try to respond.
Correct. We've always said that nurture and nature, it's never versus, it's both.
Right. And they were advocating, a focus. I was just surprised by their conclusions. I obviously had biases about what they were saying and who they were before I read the book.
Do you think a lack of their, because they're not considered as scientists within that field, right?
Well, 1 second, Juju. Hold on 1 second. For the audience, I wanted the name of that high blood pressure drug was Bidil. Y'all can ask about the study. Bidil.
How do you spell it, Bob?
You would actually spell it Bidil. Would you pronounce it Bidil?
Okay, thank you.
All right. Go ahead, Juju.
I was just going to ask you my final question. Because they were, Charles Murray particularly, he wouldn't necessarily be in that field. He was a political science. Like, is there any other work out there that you would think would be more reputable? The bell curve is problematic, right? So like, is there more data out there that we as pseudo killers would probably deem to be more,
I'm not an expert on intelligence or on the literature. I just the name that you see comes up, and I started to look up some of his stuff. Is a guy named Heyer, I think. Let me see if I can find it. And he has a book on the neuroscience of intelligence. It's Haier, Richard. I've not read the book, but he seems to be an acknowledged expert. I think.
Yeah,
so
I've seen some of his talks. I've seen some of his
Richard Heyer.
Richard Heyer.
Yeah.
Okay.
And Richard Heyer, and I think Steve Pinker's book on rationality, the nature of, but it's. I found it a very hard slog.
Okay.
But that's going to be the latest.
Behave is good too, if you understand it. Behave.
Sapolsky, Behave. Mm-hmm. But I don't know who's considered. I don't know who the people are who are considered experts on intelligence. Just don't. And my understanding is part of that is that they try to lay low because of all the controversy around it.
Right. Got it.
But I have another book too by I think she's I can't remember her name. It's called like the Genetic Lottery. Yeah, called the Genetic Lottery. Catherine. I can't remember her last name right now.
Hubert.
No, like Catherine Page. I think it's Catherine Page.
Harding or something.
Harding or something like that.
Yeah.
It's called like the Genetic Lottery. I read that book. It's a pretty good book.
Right.
But like I said, yeah, it is that field is like you're not going to find like a expert per se, but there's different books you can read on it. Biological.
You're going in and out, so
Yeah,
thank you, Dr. Andy. I was just
looking. Let me jump in real quick, Juju, real fast. Real quick.
Juxtapose the two works.
Let me say this. What I find to be very, very interesting is the misunderstanding of the evolutionary process. Because the evolutionary process will actually help you get some answers in this thing. So if it's an interplay between genes and genetics, Homo sapiens sapien have been going through this experience for approximately 350,000 years in certain areas, maybe 250,000 years. They've been going through this process. So we know race is a social construct. So if race is a social construct, for people to construct a race like, say, Black people or say like Chinese and stuff like that, now we're trying to figure out what's the line that separates what you would call a black person from a Caucasian person from a Chinese person. You'll find that line is very, very arbitrary. So to make the statement that Chinese people or black people don't have the gene of intelligence, for me, would be utterly ridiculous and pseudoscientific, because there is no such thing as race. Homo sapiens seems are 99.99 the same. So whatever genes you think you got that would make you smarter, all people have that. And based off the diversity in Africa, right, you would have the dumbest people and the most intelligent people and all in between. That's my statement on the matter. So the bell curve may not be pseudoscientific, but the application of it is. And that's always been my stance. So that's where I'm at with it. And anybody else can join in. You can finish what you're saying, Doctor.
Well, if I may respond, I mean, I think that's a good point, is that everybody's African. I mean,
Savannah apes.
I've been saying that for the longest.
No, we're all African, and anything like intelligence is going to have massive numbers of genes, each with small effect, and those genes, are African. I mean, I think that's not widely enough spoken about.
Correct. So my statement, the number that you go, Cedric, I gotta make sure, because we got some pseudos in the audience. I want to make sure. So the statement I just made, would that be a correct statement or incorrect statement? Based off the evolution of genes and all that. Just curious.
I think it is. You're right. It's largely a social construct, but when it comes to fundamental attributes, we're all human. Again, intelligence, the G factor is going to, which I think most of the intelligence researchers think is accurate. That there is something there, a general intelligence factor. That's African, and it's got to be made up of it's got to be made up of myriad genes, all contributing small effect.
All right, Dr. Andy, I gotta go, but good conversation. I'm gonna listen in.
Well, thank you for having me.
Dr. Andy, my observation was kind of in line with what the God Killer was saying, was how do we determine races and these ethnicities? In one aspect, the surveys or the work is done in these groups, and the conclusion is we need an individualistic approach. So you understand my conundrum. I'm stuck. We teach, we understand the concept of race is socially created, and so it's hard to group people in these so-called racial groups. And then the end of the conclusion is it's an individualistic approach needed. So it puts the narrative of the bell curve. It's kind of hard for me to follow. Let me say it that way, if you understand what I'm saying.
I think, but again, I was at least one of the messages of the bell curve that I took away was that we need an individualistic approach, that you approach people as individuals.
Agreed.
And that the differences between ethnicities should be basically unimportant.
Okay. Yeah, that I can understand. If we're dealing from an individual perspective and each unique circumstances to determine their particular circumstances, that I can completely understand. We are all individuals and unique, as you even mentioned with the identical twins. The similarities go up to about 70 to 80%. So it still requires an individualistic approach. So again, it puts, for me, to rest the notion of these populations and groups that have these means. I don't see it.
Okay, well, but you still have to have some. I think you still have to have some sense of groups for things like, I mean, the diseases that affect certain populations. I mean, I still think you have to think sometimes about different ethnicities. I think because they're going to be different risk factors for different illnesses. So, I mean, that's one example where I think you have to think about somebody's ethnicity. But I think my impression is the message of Murray and Herrnstein was that what they found argues for approaching people as individuals first and foremost.
Okay, yeah, I can completely concur to what you're saying, especially when we look at something like diseases. For example, I have sarcoidosis. We know that's predominantly African American or Black people illness. So yeah, I understand that aspect of it. Yes, indeed.
Okay.
So I do think you have to be sensitive at some points.
Yeah.
Oh, that's a fact. Okay, so let's. I thought that was a great discourse right there. Hearing your opinion on the book, really appreciate that. Now let's get to my favorite part of the show. Right, I want to talk about Andy. What I want to talk about is religion adaptation by natural selection or byproduct. I heard your stance on it, so let's actually get into this. This is my favorite part. Right,
yeah.
Like I'm on the byproduct side.
Yeah, we byproducts over here.
I studied evolution hard enough to where I'm saying, man, ain't no way in the world that you evolve to go ahead and grab your God and make. I think that's wild.
No, obviously I'm biased, but I think the evidence is that it's a byproduct.
I want to mention your position on agnosticism. I completely concur. In today's modern day and age, we know where these concepts come from. We can follow their evolutions. Then to say that we cannot know where and what the supernatural represents is a misleading and a false statement. We know exactly where these ideas come from. They come from the imagination of human beings. So holding agnostic position is disingenuous at this point.
Well, no, that's music to my ears, but
it's not fair.
Hey, Andy, what do you say to
Miss Tiff ain't showing up? They all running.
Yeah,
I don't understand.
They're running now. They're running. Yeah, go ahead, Ken.
That Cedric mic is extra loud. It's no good.
Got the bass on that jump. Hey, how you doing, Dr. Andy, man? So I know we talked earlier about agnostic, being on the fence and all of that.
Mm-hmm.
What do you say about, when people say that you can't really ask a question about God scientifically because it's outside of the natural world? It's like it's something supernatural, not nothing that science will cover. It's not a scientific question to ask if there's a God or not.
Well, my response to somebody who says that is that you can't have it both ways, because people are saying that their gods are having impact on the natural world. That,
correct. Yeah.
Wasn't it Jerry Falwell that said 9/11 was punishment for homosexuality or something? I mean,
sure was.
Right.
Yeah. So
right.
I mean, you can't have it both ways and say, well, you can't say yay or nay to something like a God who's not part of the natural world. Well, wait a second. You're saying that this God at other times listens to your prayers and intervenes in the natural world.
Right.
You can't have it. You can't have it both. You can't have it both ways.
I kind of felt like with the term atheist is an unfair term to even have, because if you don't believe, you just don't believe, right?
Right.
So why do you have to label people based on just that particular, belief? it seems like it was a way to kind of like outcast people that didn't believe in what everybody else believed in, and give them a label so you know who to stay away from and who not to, who to cast out of society. But that's just my own personal opinion on that.
No, I think one of the problems we have is that we don't have a good atheism, and atheist has become a pejorative. It's become a negative term, and it's it can be used almost as a slander. What I say to people is, people say, are you an atheist? And I just say, I'm an educated person in the 21st century.
Right. Because it's like what Neil deGrasse Tyson was saying. It already gives people judgment about you that they haven't even talked to you, but they hear the term that you're that, so they already have a preconceived idea of who you are.
Yeah, there's already a prejudice that if you're an atheist, there's something tainted and you're morally reprehensible or questionable, or I think the other thing, one can say is I'm a realist.
Right.
I mean, if we have to have an IST on the end of it, realist, rationalist, realist, I think.
Materialist.
Yeah.
One of the arguments always made in our discourses in the Discord is the in erroneous statement that we are hardwired to believe and then supposedly in gods, where I say all actions that humans take require belief, but that doesn't prescribe us to a belief in the supernatural. What do you say to that?
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, we're hard. I think we're hardwired. We're hardwired to develop beliefs because that helps us predict the future.
Right.
And in a world where we didn't understand thunderstorms and lightning and night and day and the weather, the religions and the idea of a supernatural was a useful fiction. And it arose from some of our adaptations. I think primarily the attachment adaptation. When we're scared, we look to a parent.
Yeah.
And then all the other things. But I mean, beliefs are things that are useful to predict the future.
Your explanation or expounding on the problem of evil just now was very beautiful. It is one that is not often addressed within the confinements of this community. Most religious folks in this community are not grounded in these philosophical arguments. So the way you expounded on the problem of evil, I appreciate that. It is illustrative of either God's impotence or his just not being real. Let's face it.
Well, thank you, but thanks, Sam Harris. I mean, you can pull it up on YouTube. He's got it usually will pull up under best of Sam Harris's arguments, or there's a clip from a debate he had at Notre Dame with Dr. Craig.
Yes,
and some people have. Oh, you've seen that?
Yeah, I'm a fan.
Yeah, well, but just they pulled just that. I think it's a 10-minute clip, and I think it's one of the best things out there.
Now, do you think that there's some benefit to having that belief? Say maybe because I know sometimes it's argued that it makes people feel better, or it gives them a sense of security. Maybe if they're in a situation, a crisis or something like that.
Well, I mean, placebos have utility. I mean, it may make people help feel better. I mean, I'm certainly not going to attack somebody's belief if it helps them at a point in time in their life, if they're dying or in pain or something like that. I mean, I think you have to, but I think Well, you have to pick your battle, but when they're using their beliefs to harm others and to harm me,
Right.
that's where, you know, no, that's where I think, you know, you push back.
Yeah, because
I think,
sometimes I wonder. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
no, please.
No, sometimes I wondered if telling some people, like, say, somebody that believes, you know, if it wasn't for God, they would have done such and such, or they might have killed themselves, something like that. Would it be better to just leave them be with their belief and not, you know, tell them, you know, what's real? Or, you know, sometimes that's kind of, you know, that's
I
an
think that's
interesting.
I think that's a really important question, and I think you sort of leave them alone. I give you an example: is Deion Sanders made a serious suicide attempt, and he survived, and he attributes a lot of it to his religious belief, I believe, and so, you know, I don't think I'd get in an argument with Deion on that.
Right.
I don't think I would, but again, I think you draw the line when people's religious beliefs are negatively impacting you, other people. I particularly,
Right.
you know, when it's impacting their children. I mean,
True indeed.
that's where I think children have a fundamental human right to be protected from religious indoctrination.
Right. There's some talking in the background.
I think we may have talked about this before, but if you've never read it, pull up Nicholas Humphrey's talk, "What Shall We Tell the Children?" It was an address to Amnesty International, I think in 1999. If you can't find it, email me. I'll send it to you. I think he makes the most powerful case that children should have a fundamental right to be protected from religious indoctrination. So that's
Yeah.
another place.
Yeah, I think some say it's criminal to indoctrinate children with
Yeah, and I think it's one of the best things I've read on the issue. I wish it was more widely known.
Okay, got a question for the chat. Ask Andy to speak on religion evolving as an antidepressant. Its adaptation benefit being psychological. That's Sosa. I don't know why Sosa ain't up here.
Yeah, I wonder how that question is going to work for the mother that just lost her 5-year-old.
I don't think you can say religion evolved as an antidepressant. I think some people may use it when they're depressed, and if it helps their depression, you know, I'm not going to get in the way of that if they're severely depressed. I mean, if that helps them, okay. But yeah, I don't know of any. I don't know. I think there are some studies that religious belief may help with depression. I'd have to look that up.
Yeah,
it's like Go ahead.
I'm sure you could find as many that says it causes depression.
Well, I think in some people it does.
But I think the real point is, if you're using it as an antidepressant, then why is the God you're talking about based off of your cultural awareness and your environment? Why don't the God that you know nothing about pop up? If it was so interlinked to the evolution of your brain and all that, or then you would actually be able to. It would pop up clear, consistent across all Homo sapiens. Yeah,
that's a good point. If it was an adaptation, it'd be there automatically.
But it's not across all Homo sapiens, but there are other countries where they believe in, you know, higher powers and things of that nature. Wouldn't that be kind of the same what you're saying?
Nah, not at all. I'm saying higher power will be the same. You,
The
you know what I'm
same.
saying? Like the
Everybody
gene,
would
like
have
the
the same
variation
one.
for skin color. You can look, you can see what you know what the gene is for skin color. You can look up the alleles, the variations. So
Gotcha.
what would that gene be, right? For religion, like, man, it's so. And as a matter of fact, there's no scholarly consensus on exactly what a religion is. It's so multifaceted. You can add it on and take it off, and right, yeah, come on, now it's very. I think like I think so. Go ahead,
Wouldn't
It's like the variety of books. There's fiction, history. There's all sorts of books and all sorts of writing. And it's a reading and writing is a byproduct.
Byproduct. All right, we got a super chat here. Joel, he might be taking us back a little bit.
I can't.
Can't see it.
Yeah, small.
I had it on private. I apologize. I didn't have the right chat button. I'm sorry.
And stop sharing your screen. You probably need to stop sharing your screen. I don't have it up, but that.
Okay, let me. I'll stop sharing. Hold on.
Yeah, you might can see it better after you stop sharing.
No, I can see it now. I
okay.
Pushed, let me. If you give me 2 minutes here, and let me run through the chat since I missed things. Just
now, the question is, you can run through the chat. I'm gonna deal with the one that's on the screen right here. It says, my question is, are all participants in this study, must be talking about the bell curve, from the same background, financially equal, family structures, cultures, and verified current and past health history? I think he took that back to
which
I think
that's what study he was talking.
Joel is expounding on the variables that are unmeasurable.
No, it's the they used a large data set, and I think it was people, different cultures. I think it was just the people who were high school age in a certain period of time. It was called the National Longitudinal Survey of Youth. That was their main data set in the bell curve.
Okay. All right.
And I think it varied in socioeconomic status, education.
Okay. All right. We're going back around again. Where you at, Juju? Can't hear you. All right. Shalimbe, Miss Tiff.
Hey,
What up, Tip?
what's up? Great presentation, Dr. Andy.
Well, thank you.
As always, thank you for gracing the platform. I don't have any questions right now because I was running out.
She's scared. She's scared.
I really don't have any questions. I mean, what questions can I have?
Nothing. You don't have any questions. You good?
Is an agnostic? So you said earlier that an agnostic was just lazy.
Well, I mean, that's a matter of opinion.
That was kind of harsh out there.
I don't argue
disingenuous at this point.
You see, I don't argue.
Genuine.
I'm trying to talk.
Let her talk. You cannot talk over. Come on, man.
I do not argue philosophical things. That's philosophical ideology is one's personal preference, and that's how I like to keep it. I'm not going to argue it. So there you go.
Oh, there you have it. I don't know what that was right there, but there.
Yeah, that's just what it was. What I said.
I like
that. Philosophical stance.
Flim flam.
That ain't flim flam.
No, I ain't saying all that. Like you said, you don't argue philosophical stances, and no one's going to press you to actually argue that.
But y'all not saying that we aren't hardwired to believe, right?
Who?
I don't know if it was Cedric.
Yeah, we clarify that. We clarify that misinterpretation of hardwired to believe. It says nothing about supernatural or gods. For that, it would need to be a product of evolution, and we would actually be able to trace it. Right?
Gotcha. I see what you're saying. Yep.
That argument is out the window. We ain't gonna hear that in the back chat no more.
So let's go again. Hey, Andy, give us again. I watched your lectures and how I'm sure you talked about being hardwired for believing. Were you saying for believing in religion and gods, or just believing in general? Because I know you give great examples of that. What exactly? Because people try to make it, you hardwired to believe in God, and I think that's ridiculous.
Yeah,
right. No, I mean we're obviously hardwired to form beliefs. We have to come to some conclusions. I mean, I have beliefs that the weather might be different tomorrow than it is today. I have I may come to believe that certain person has particular view about me I need to contend with. I mean, I think we all have the capacity to develop beliefs, because beliefs help us guide our behavior in the future, help us predict the future. So the capacity for belief, I think, is hardwired, or it's a adaptation in the brain, and I think there's also stuff on, we're hardwired to make sort of instant judgments, believe first, ask questions later, because that's useful. If you tell me that there's an invading army on the other side of the Blue Ridge Mountains here, it's going to help my survival if I believe you and act accordingly, than saying, I think I'll go check it out before I believe it.
Do you think the byproduct of it might have came from just the patterns, patternicity? I think Michael Sherman called it. Say like the people that did the rain dance, the Indians that used to rain dance, and they did it one time and the rain came, so they figured every time they did it that it was going to make the rain, because the rain gods was going to send the rain down to them. So that pattern kind of, or that what they thought was a pattern,
right?
Yeah,
they become. Yeah, and we can, we jump at correlations and we don't understand causation.
Right.
And
right.
It may become a useful fiction if I think, the gods are angry and they're causing thunder and lightning, and they will then bring rain. I mean, that's probably true. If there's thunder and lightning, it's usually followed by rain, but our ancestors, easily would have looked for a cause. You and I understand the causes of weather patterns, but they didn't. And so it would be, and the other thing too is that we're biased. That's why I think it's a byproduct. I mean, one of the things that we're biased towards is seeing human agency first and acting accordingly. If the door slams, I'm going to think it's a burglar before I think it's the wind.
Right. True indeed.
All right, let's see if we can get Sosa in there. All right, Sosa was good. I know you got some backfire on that.
Can I be heard?
Man, you right out the gate.
Also, make sure the mic works. They're not gonna fight you. I'm the only one that's gonna give you some pushback. I hate to be the guy that's going against the newborn baby death. Like, geez. But you know what I'm saying. But okay, so I think in terms of when you look at the adaptation aspect of it, right, there's overlap even within the adaptation argument and the byproduct argument. Like, there's, in terms of cohesion, right, that you find the same argument in the adaptation part of it. But I think that one of the adaptation qualities are costly signaling. what they would be good towards adaptation. They also like I think some of the newer convenient thought was religion involved as an antidepressant, as a coping mechanisms. You know what I'm saying? So in terms of its adaptive qualities would be more psychological as opposed to looking for something more biological, like say with the eye. You know what I'm saying? So so I see that aspect of it, and just with the like if you, in a sense, like if you live your life as if the religion was true, then the longer, the better chance you have of passing your genes on to the next generation. You see what I'm saying? So I look at it. I see those adaptive qualities as the adaptation qualities. So I lean more towards adaptation versus
Well,
byproduct.
yeah, I mean, there's an argument there. There are people who argue that it is an adaptation, and that people who had religious belief live longer, or it did have some survival and reproductive consequences. I just think that's more of a stretch than a byproduct. But to go back to the antidepressant piece, okay. If religion works as an antidepressant, that to me doesn't argue for adaptation. If I'm depressed, sometimes there are things that I pick up and read which are helpful to me. That doesn't make reading and writing an adaptation. It doesn't make poetry or an adaptation. So that would be one response I would have on the antidepressant piece.
I'm sorry, Andy. My phone repeat that one more time. My phone got glitched up. Right? YouTube video start playing the minute you explain that. Repeat that one more time.
Sure.
One more time.
Sure. The one of the arguments is, well, if religion or religious belief helps ease emotional suffering, isn't that an argument for adaptation? Well, my counter to that would be no. That doesn't necessarily say it's an adaptation. If I'm depressed and there's some things that I can read which ease my depression, that doesn't make reading and writing an adaptation. Reading and writing, I think, is pretty clearly a cultural invention, a byproduct of other adaptations.
The only pushback I would give is, like, if we're looking at its evolutionary development, this would predate reading and writing. You see what I'm saying? So I think that
good point. Good point.
So I would use that.
Okay. Good point. Good point.
Hey, Dr. Andy,
I know the other thing, the other argument I would make, which I forget about, is if religion were an adaptation, then you'd have a clear religious part of your brain that would light up, and you don't see that. And I think one of the most interesting pieces of research has not gotten much attention was back in 2008, I think, at National Institute of Health by a guy named Kapogiannis, and they were brain scanning, religious people, and I don't remember exactly what they were doing, having them do or say at the time.
I think like praying and meditation. I think I kind of recall somewhat of that study. Like I think it was like a lot of it had to do with praying and like meditation.
Yeah,
and then monitoring their brain region to see the results. Yeah.
Yeah, and what Kapogiannis found in that study was that the areas of the brain that were lighting up were the areas of the brain that had to do with theory of mind. They were the places that were lighting up are the same places that light up when you may think about what Bobby's thinking, what's going on in his mind. So right. I think that was one of the strongest arguments I saw when I was doing my little book, was that here, there was a clear adaptation for something else, theory of mind mechanism, that was being utilized for the person's religiosity.
Yeah,
And
like
That's
I
what
said, I gotta go back over. Go ahead, Ken. Go ahead, Ken.
Yeah,
was about
but
to
I
ask
would
you
look
what
at
would
that
be the.
because
Go ahead.
I should have put it on my. I should have put it on my slide. Is you don't have any neurologic evidence for adaptation.
Yeah, that's what I was just about to ask you. What's the evidence that you would need for to show that that's adaptation?
Well, then I think what you would. No, go ahead, please.
Go ahead. I think we don't really find too much neurological evidence for it because neuroscience is just being as empathy. And like I said, that study that I think that just like even like you see how far we are along with the free will conversation. I think we're just getting to where that's the aim now. You know what I mean? Where we're looking at the brain and see what area lights up. And I think religion too is going to be that's going to be kind of hard to gauge too, because a lot of the same, like I said, a lot of the brain function with religion are going to be some of the same functions with other mechanisms. So I think they will be trying to decipher which which one. But have you seen this study in terms of like how I think it was a weird study too, and like how prayer they were talking about they were looking at prayer and how and if and how people if it makes people live longer or live shorter. You familiar with that study?
I'm.
It was a while ago.
I thought there was the study. I thought there was the study about they had people pray for people who were in the hospital and had surgery.
Yeah, I've seen that one too. Yeah, I've seen that. I've seen that. I've seen that one too.
You're thinking about a different study.
Yeah, because I've seen that one too. I've seen that one too. Yeah. That one, the one pray for live longer. I thought there was one where they were trying to show like the health benefits of it, like people that prayed, like that might have been the same study, but in that study, not just praying for them, I think it was also the results of people that prayed in terms of their own well being, right? Um, I can't. Like I said, I don't want to misrepresent the study. I have to go back. It's been a while.
I think it might be.
Yeah, if you can find it, send it to me, please.
All right. Yeah, it's been a while. I don't want to misrepresent it. But
I think you might find that the people that did pray like that probably might have took better care of themselves already. So it wouldn't be. Remember, like how we did with the plants, like people that talk to their plants. And the plants grew better because they take better care of their plants anyway. So it's like that's.
No, I can't remember the study, but they control for certain things. But I can't. It's been a while since I read that study. I don't want to.
So hold on. Now it's based off it's based off the impact of your culture and how you believe in something, because you can believe that it's the rock. If you pray for this holy rock like the Muslims do, right? Then that holy rock will bring care and help me heal faster. That's what you believe in, right? So you just believe that. But at the end of the day, it's you're taking care of yourself more. It's you're focusing on the treatment plan that you really dedicated to get you through that. So I'm not the one sitting, because see, once we start doing that, then all of a sudden we could say, hey, the world is in a better place because of Christianity. If not for Christianity, Africa would be super backwards. And goodness gracious, what about Australia? They wouldn't have known. You could say all these things, which really doesn't make sense. So I would never be the one to say that any particular religion would allow a person to last longer.
No, just like you have the placebo effect and nocebo effect, there would be if you believe you feel better or you believe you're going to do better, those people that actually believe they're going to feel better, whether fictitious or not, rational or not, they will yield better results just based on, or they will report better results in terms of pain, so forth and so on, just because of what the brain does when you believe those types of things.
Agreed, but that then undermines the God argument. It is a product of the brain. Right?
I'm not talking about if God is real.
No.
Yeah, the care.
The effect to a God.
Right, we dropping that link for anybody who want to get in, man. This is our time to show. We dropped the link. Jump on, ask the questions. The Andy, man, he's a good sport. And trust me, we don't gotta help him out. He's a gamer. He's gonna ask our questions. He's not gonna go the way you want him to go, even in our questions. He don't choose sides. He's like, oh man, I thought he was gonna agree with me. He doesn't choose no sides.
Nope.
He does.
That's what I like.
That's what I
That's
like.
what I like.
He
That's what I
based his
like.
answer based off of how he read the book and what he seen, and he drew that line and said, well, this part and that part, I enjoyed that. I appreciate that. All right, we got the first person there. Due diligence. What's your question for Andy? Due diligence. Unmute yourself.
All right. Let me tell my background right quick. You hear me?
Loud and clear.
All right. Peace to the panel. I appreciate you guys for letting me up. It was definitely an interesting show. Andy made some great points. I think he was objective in his analysis too of the book. I don't think he went either way, which was what was good. He said he agreed with some stuff, but my question would be concerning the book is that, first we have to get out the way, the past of how whenever we talk about intelligence and science, it was always grouped with pseudoscience and scientific racism and all that type of stuff. So now when it comes up, epigenetics and such, and now when it comes up, it's like this guy bringing all these objective stats, which we know stats can be skewed also, right? But he's bringing up all these so-called objective facts, but then don't take any position on the genetic aspect of it or the environmental aspect of it, which for me still leaves it open-ended. I think we all could have already like.
Is that a question though?
Yeah, I'm
finna come to the question.
Yeah. Well, I just want to know what he think about that. Cause like even asking you, Aunt, could we all already agree that just through our upbringing, because in the book it states that Asians are smarter than whites and whites are smarter than blacks in America, right? But we all have that experience. Like it didn't take no stats for us to figure that out, and we know why. I think we got the way that society is structured.
What was the why? What was the why? Did you know the why? Because of what?
Oh, that's what I'm going through right now. Society is structured in such a way. Also, we have culture. I think the other ethnicities that's above us take education more seriously than us. And I hate to say that, but I believe that that's an objective fact. Whenever you look at it as a whole, whenever I live my life, I do think that those two ethnicity groups that's above us intellectually take education more seriously. And we started at a disadvantage too. So I think when we take those factors in consideration, we will know why. But the question is always the genetic component, the inherent component, and that's the place to where we always use that to imply that people are better than other people, and then that's that slippery slope.
Yeah. No, I think that puts it well. I mean, then we've got a problem in that the science can be distorted, and then the science can be used for nefarious purposes, and I think that we've got a terrible problem. But I think you can't. I don't think you should run away from it. I don't think you should make a taboo for talking about it or a taboo for researching it. But yeah, we've got a problem, and one of the somebody said earlier, should we wait to try to dig into it again, or should we dig into it knowing well that it's going to be difficult and controversial? And I'm a living example of, I think, one of the problems of making it a taboo. I mean, it was pretty clearly something that was labeled as wrong and racist and terrible. So I never bothered to read it. I accepted the judgment of the critics, and never looked at it. And I think that that's a mistake.
Please.
It was a mistake on my part. And I think, but it's just such a difficult, it's such a difficult question, but
I'm going to,
let me just finish it. But I see a lot of students, both white and African American, from very, very disadvantaged, backgrounds, who are struggling academically, and and they're getting depressed, and so they're seeing me at student health, and my job is I work at a university student health center. I'm one of the psychiatrists there, and the good news is that UVA, where I work, is committed to diversity and inclusion, but I see students from disadvantaged backgrounds who are struggling terribly, and I'd like to know. I'd like there to be research on the things that have impacted their cognitive abilities, both environmental and genetic, to try to have something in the future for the next generation.
I appreciate it. I'm going to jump down so somebody else can jump up, but I'm going to say one more thing before I smash. The issue with intelligence and putting intelligence over other people, it just gives people it make you feel some type of way, even if it is just the objective science. But like, what if we were to say that, the Africans are more biologically, I don't want to say superior, but better adapted to the earth because they are more genetically diverse. People don't want to accept that. You know what I mean? If we was to say something like that Africans are more genetically diverse, which makes them, genetically, quote unquote, superior, I think that would be an issue, even though genetics says that. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, we as I said, we got as soon as you're dealing with any kind of group differences.
What did he say?
You're on fertile soil. You're on
Yeah,
fertile soil
for
prejudice. You're on fertile soil for prejudice.
Yeah, as soon as you cross racial lines, you're gonna have issues.
There's no evidence to say what you just said.
Right.
You mixed that in. Hey, Andy, he tried to slip one on you. Andy, hold on, Cedric, hold on, bro. You tried to slip one on. You tried to act like there's some scientific data that says that Africans are more fit to live on the earth. It's crazy as hell. All of us are 99.99%. Africans, humans, Homo sapiens sapien. There's no such. Humans are actually fit to live on earth because we evolved in Earth's atmosphere. There's no one group more fitted for living on the earth. That's a wow. Due diligence, you funny guy with that.
So we'll have that conversation another time, but what genetic diversity is, being that we have more potential to be suited in different environments. So that's essentially the same thing, but we can have that conversation another time. I ain't scared of it.
That's not the same thing because we mutate to different
You don't. Maybe continental Africans, but you don't.
Wow,
again,
all right, we're gonna have the next one, D-Jazz. We'll do the next one.
Peace.
All right, let's come on. All right, D-Jazz, appreciate you coming through, bro. All right,
Joe got glasses on. He got glasses on. He's serious. Go ahead, Joe.
Hey, y'all have glasses on. Hey, Dr. Andy, peace. Hey, peace to the panel. How y'all doing?
What's going on, man? That's a nice shirt you got there, man.
Yeah, boy.
Flag, African power.
Yeah.
What's good?
What's happening?
Well organized. All right, anyway. Hey, Dr. Andy. You remember me, Dr. Andy? We talked before. Anyway, so my question, okay, ask my question. And I think you kind of touched on it just now and given an answer to due diligence. And that, like the book that Dr. Murray wrote, isn't the results going to be skewed if the subjects that you're testing, if they don't all come from like the same background, they have this, like you can kind of like know some of their upbringing, Like there's just so many variables that's going to skew the results. Wouldn't a book like that be problematic anyway?
Well, I mean, anytime you do that kind of research, there's going to be potential problems, but they make, they, and I'm not a statistician or a psychometrician, so, I'm not an expert qualified to judge their research, but at least it seemed to me they did try to control for those different variables of income, education, culture. But I'm not a
Yeah,
specialist. I'm not a specialist.
yeah. What they
And I
do,
think,
what they
and
do to
that's why.
control for that, Joe. What they do to control for that is first they'll use adoption studies, right? They'll do that first to try to get different kids from different backgrounds, same finance, right? And then they'll go from that to um uh not my cigar twin, but like non-identical twins, but they're not identical,
Right.
right? Because
Okay.
they share the same gene, so they do that, and then they go to twins because twins are like basically they're clones, right? So
Well,
so they look at the results they get from from those twins, and those twins kind of bear real good results because it's the same environment, even in terms of the egg, same family structure, and so go ahead, doctor.
no, but that's how you tease out. That's how you tease out genetics. There are twin
Right,
studies, are children raised in the same home, um,
same
uh,
genes.
children raised apart, fraternal
Right,
twins raised in the same home, fraternal twins raised apart, identical
yeah,
twins raised in the same home, identical twins raised apart. And it's the twin studies that are thought to isolate the effect of genetics the best.
right,
But even when you have identical twins, um, uh, the correlation is never 100%. There's never you don't
yeah, yeah.
because
You can never get 100%.
identical
Yeah,
twins are not 100%, and I think the maximum correlation on intelligence in identical twins I think is somewhere between 70-80%.
I
But
think it's 80. I
that
think it's
means
like 86.
86. Thank you. So there's 14% of something else.
All right.
Yeah,
So
and
that just
and they had some interesting studies too, where like they had like I think it's called monozygotic twins that were like separated at birth, and they both ended up, I think, at like Stanford. And one dude was calling the dude by the wrong name, like calling like Jimmy. So he's like, "Why you calling me Jimmy? I'm not Jimmy." Come to find out, his twin was at Stanford, and it's crazy though. But go ahead, Joe.
Yeah,
Go
it's a great documentary. Three Identical Strangers.
Yeah, the triplets. Yeah, the triplets is even crazy. Triplets, Joe. It's crazy.
Yeah, where they
Different
tried
all right.
to
background.
So what is the
What happened?
study?
They was triplets and didn't know it.
right. They were triplets. If you've not seen the documentary, it
Yeah,
is absolutely it's worth seeing.
What's
It's
it
worth
called?
seeing independent of our discussion tonight.
yeah.
Because it's about
Separated at birth. Yeah,
it's about the use
Oh,
and
separated
misuse.
at birth.
It's about the use and misuse of research on this question of genetic endowment.
Mm.
It's a
So
sobering lesson, because there were very prominent researchers who did things that they shouldn't have done.
ah. So then what is it? What is it? What is these studies good for then? Like should we be just reading them just as entertainment, or should we be taking the data and taking it serious? I mean, how should we?
Obviously, I think the latter. I mean, I mean, because you want to know the relative weight of genetics versus environment,
Okay.
and they're not separate. I mean, because bad, I mean, for instance, if you look at it, there's a study where they looked at kids who were abused, and um, and certain kids who had a particular genetic variant for I think it was the MAOI A gene or something like that, had worse outcomes than the kids who didn't have that gene. So they identified a gene variant that influenced the effect of abuse.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's so, again, that's something that's you have to research both.
Okay. So what about with intelligence, though? I mean, because most of the fights start over intelligence. That's where if you try to say one group is less intelligent than another group, and it's based and built around phenotype and ancestry, those kind of things, you're in for a fight, right? So that's why I'm asking, like.
Well, okay, but it can be used badly. But if my position is you want to know, since intelligence, one of the things that Murray and Herrnstein, one of the points they make is that intelligence is a risk factor for certain outcomes.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if intelligence is a risk factor for certain adverse outcomes, then it seems incumbent upon us to try to understand everything we can about what goes into intelligence. Okay. And if there are group differences in intelligence, if Ashkenazi Jews are a whole lot smarter than you and me, I think we want to find out why.
Okay.
I think we want to find out. We want to find out what the reasons are, and if the reasons are something about increased neuronal connectivity, then we want to find out the things that enhance neuronal connectivity. I mean, it just that's
all right. Last question. I'm gonna drop off. What's the likelihood of the U.S. government dumping a whole bunch of money on the poor to make them more intelligent? Peace. I'm gonna drop down. You hear that question, Andy? What's the
I think
likelihood?
what's the chances of the government putting money into research on the poor in terms of helping with intelligence? Do I have the question? Yeah.
They're gonna do it?
I don't certainly I don't think you're going to have the incoming administration do it, but I think you would hope at some point that there will be a return to researching intelligence and ethnic and racial differences.
Okay.
I mean, it's too important not to research it.
Right.
And
Let's
to put
keep hope alive.
and okay, but the other thing, and to try to put in guardrails against its misuse.
Right. See, that's what needs to happen. Okay. Hey, Dr. Andy, good show tonight, man. Thanks for coming through. Peace, y'all.
Appreciate you, Joe, man. Appreciate your constant support, man. All right, we got Brother Terry in here, still official, man. Go ahead, Chilimbe, if you want to say something over there, Terry.
No. Yeah, I just wanted to bring out that documentary about the three siblings is good, but there's some questionable things going on behind the scenes. And so it seems as if some evidence has came out afterwards that they actually did know each other prior to that, and that one of the families was already aware of the other brothers. But it still shows some unique correlations and ethical concerns as well. But that's it.
Oh, there was terrible behavior on the part of the psychiatrists and the people who were researching them. And the main psychiatrist was a very famous child psychiatrist whose papers I used to read when I did my training. And there are lawsuits going on as we speak about trying to get some of the records peeled out of I think Yale, who has the records. It's an utterly fascinating story. And if you're interested in it, one of the world's experts on twins, a woman named Nancy Siegel, just wrote a book on the three identical strangers and that whole project. And it's got a great title about them. Let me see if I can find it. It's just, yeah, but if you have not seen the documentary, I recommend it, because it really touches on some of what we've been talking about tonight, because they were trying to find out the contributions of nature versus nurture, and separating, in this case, identical triplets at birth, or at 6 months.
All right, while you looking for that, what's going on, Terry? Serial Killer Fisher, how you doing, brother?
I'm good, bro. How y'all been?
Hey, man, good to have you on.
Peace, Terry. What it do? What it do?
Man, I'm good, bro. I'm good. Surviving over here. So I do want to ask a question, right? And I hope it's not off subject, but it's on subject, but I hope it doesn't change the conversation. I want to ask a question about pretty much the condition of African Americans today, based on what we have been through in the past, and people trying to judge our intelligence off of the condition we have been conditioned to be in. Is this something that we should be measuring?
Do
you understand the question?
I
don't even think I asked it right, actually. So,
well, I didn't follow exactly the condition we're in currently, but then I lost you.
I'm talking about African Americans as a
Right.
people. We are it's people out here that literally think they're Native Americans. We have an identity crisis going on. We have an education situation going on in our community, to where as though it's a lot of people that we're just not getting the same education as other races. And I'm thinking, the way I'm thinking is the reason that they say, and I'm not going to say African Americans have low intelligence, but the reason they say some African Americans have low intelligence is because of inherent behavior. It's because our parents wasn't taught anything, and their parents wasn't taught anything, because of systematic racism, because they wanted to keep us down, they wanted to keep us inferior, and that's why a lot of our kids, even today, a lot of our kids can't even write their name in second grade. Especially here in Baltimore City. So I'm wondering, is intelligence something that's inherited and not something? Think about it like a computer coming off the factory line, right? Fresh computer, but it gets programmed certain information. Of course, if I program this computer with more information, it's going to be more intelligent. You see what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
So should we weigh anything off of race, anything, or should we just weigh it based on what the people were programmed from birth? You see what I'm saying?
Not.
I know what he's saying. Let me put it. Let me put it this way. He's basically saying, based off of the inequality in North America, that marginalized communities would certainly score lower, based off of lack of access to good education, good books, and good food sources that would actually help generate intelligence. I think that's basically what he's saying in a nutshell. They've been programmed in that manner.
Right. There's the effects of discrimination, systematic racism, all those things absolutely are going to impact intelligence and are going to impact education. Okay, but it's not either or. There's that food deprivation is interacting with genes that are programmed to build brains, and part of those brains are the the parts that have to do with the G factor of intelligence. Okay, so you want to understand the deprivations, the environmental deprivations, the poverty, the discrimination. You want to understand all those things, but that's not all. That environment is interacting with biology. It's interacting with brains that are built by instructions that are produced by genes. And you want to find out what those genes are, what effects they have, what you want, and you want to find you want to find out if anything can be done. I mean, if we know the genes that transcribe for neuronal connectivity in prefrontal cortex, that's going to be important. And we're you're going to want to know, is it just making sure kids have good food, or are you wanting to make sure they have specific things, that they have choline, that they have iodine, that you want to make sure that they're not living in houses that have old lead paint in them.
Can I hold you up right there? What if people were living in houses with lead paint? What effect would that have on the children?
Lead has adverse impact on the brains, and is thought to be one of the things that impacts intelligence. And intelligence here is cognitive abilities, and that lead impacts that.
And what about lead pipes?
Yeah. Exposure to lead has adverse impact. And it's important that we know that, because you don't want, just to take it to the political. So you've got children with impaired cognitive ability. You don't want that turning into be used as justification for racist attitudes towards minority or different racial groups. If one of the culprits is lead, you want to know. And if they're if there are things that will help the biology of intelligence, we want to know it.
Yeah, I could agree with you. And Terry, we're from Baltimore, Maryland, man. There was some studies done on lead paint and how they actually let those mothers, and they studied them to stay in those houses that had that lead paint. The travesty around John Hopkins and all that. So yeah, to go and say, well, that community is not intelligent, and then leave out the factors of lead paint and stuff like that, man. That's
right,
bro.
And the thing is, we still got lead pipes that's going through our city right now that they're talking about, that they're trying to replace, but it's going to cost a lot of money, and we're still drinking lead water right now as we speak.
So that's everybody done.
Right. And that's terrible.
Oh, man.
And you want to find out if there's certain, like I was talking with the abuse gene, you want to find out if there's certain genes that make an individual more vulnerable to the toxic effects of lead.
That's an interesting point. All right, we got another caller here. What's going on, Silly D, Professor? I ain't gonna call you Professor. What's up, D?
No, you need to cut it out. You already starting. Yeah, man. Yeah, man, I'm good, man. Just chiming in, seeing what y'all got going on.
Yeah, we got Professor Andy up here right now, Dr. Andy up here, and our conversation was loosely based around religion, adaptation by natural selection, or a byproduct. We also talked about atheism, humanist, and Gnosticism, right? We also talked about the bell curve. So what is your question?
Sound like mostly religious, right?
Well, what's your question? There's a few things I
just came on. I just came in, so I'm listening now.
Oh, you don't got a question then. We did this show strictly for, he did it. Andy did the presentation. You'd have to watch that to ask a good question. That's not one.
Right. I'm checking y'all out now.
Okay. All right, brother. Appreciate you. All right, so man, any more questions from the panel? Any more questions in the chat? I don't want to hold up Andy no more longer than I have to. I felt like it was a great presentation as always, and we appreciate you. And yeah, man, I know you'll be back again one day.
No,
right?
look, you guys, look. I mean, I live in the Bible Belt. You know, I mean,
Oh man,
I've got very religious friends. This is like, you know, this is like being
Sure.
this is like being, you know, let out of prison and being able to talk to fellow souls. I mean, you
That's
know,
funny. That's funny. But as I have invited Andy several times, and Punk keeps forgetting, I want Andy to come back and do a show specifically around the work that you do in psychiatry to really kind of delve into some of the topic of mental health. That's what the next Andy show is going to be. How about that, Dr. Andy?
no, look, that would be. I'm happy to do stuff on depression, substance abuse, suicide. I mean, the mental health stuff, because I'll tell you, this was a stretch because, like I said, I had avoided reading the bell curve, and so this got me to, you know, finish reading it and to research the history of intelligence research and the history of its abuses and misuses. So I'm appreciative of being asked to come because I learned a lot.
Okay.
But I've got to be clear here. I'm not an expert in this area.
There you go.
You just, you know. So
oh, you're experts in believing, though. We all humans.
Yeah, but this not the intelligence stuff is like, I mean, this was strange. So I don't want. I want to be clear. I am not an expert in intelligence research, bell curve, you know, behavioral genetics.
Correct.
That's all, and it's all a stretch.
All right. Okay. Well, we got B Money. You were saying something, Mr.
No, I just look forward to having you back for that show, and we'll work closely to get that ready.
Yeah, get that together, right? And get that agnostic. How you say it?
Gnostic.
Agnostic.
Don't believe agnostic. That weak position.
Yeah, get out of here.
So see how much of a bully he can be.
Oh, now we're
nobody was even talking about that, and he brought that up.
Let me read this super chat, man.
Coming back doing the show.
Super chat. Money B says, "Is culture a bigger influence than genetics?"
Huh?
I guess on intelligence. That's his question.
My understanding is that they think that genetics is more, that the heritability on the genetics is more. I think it's
I think it's like 50%, Andy.
60. I thought it was 60.
But look, I gotta say at least. Let's just say at least 50%. At least.
Yeah.
Yeah, at least 40 to 50 to be the safe side. But yeah, it could be as high as 60, but it's high.
Yeah. So I think we just illustrated that I'm not an expert, and you got people in the community that have read more on this than I have.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Now I appreciate your honesty. All right, Ed Chop. Somebody's going to say something?
Yeah. Listen, that's also one of the things I forgot to bring up. Is that one of the criticisms to the bell curve is that they seem to switch between genetic determinism and heritability.
Genetic determinism and
heritability. Almost using them interchangeably at times. Did you see that in the book?
I thought they were just talking. I thought they were talking about them as equivalent, as genetics and heritability, and that they remained. I think the phrase they used was they remained agnostic on how much was genetic and how much was environmental.
Mm.
Okay. So one of the things. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, please.
One of the books that actually analyzed it, I I forgot the name of it, but I'll try to remember it next time I look it up. I read it years ago. Was that matter of fact, Noam Chomsky also uses it as an example in which their genetic determinism and inheritability really shouldn't be used interchangeably that way, as in the way they use in the bell curve. Um, based in the concept that they use the hand like the fingers, right? So the fingers of a hand are genetically determined. How many fingers you have in your hand genetically determined, but the heritability is almost zero, and that's because the variation in between them is not that much. And they and I haven't seen Charles Murray answer this critique yet, and that they use those things interchangeably as if because heritability is somehow another genetic determinant. So I'll see if I can find that book or at least a summary of the book.
Yeah, if you could, I mean, I would just off the top of my head, I would agree with you. I don't think, I think we should avoid the word genetic determinism because that implies that it's set in stone and can't be changed. It's something, if something is genetic, it can't be changed. And if it's something that's environmental, it can be changed. And I think that's a misunderstanding.
Hey, but wasn't Murray arguing for that though? Like I think wasn't Murray's belief that it couldn't be fixed?
I don't think, I think there's stuff in Murray and Herrnstein where they try to make the point that, you know, environmental stuff can be just as fixed as, you know, as in anything genetic. That, you know, if you've got lead poisoning that does damage, that's environmental, and
Yeah, right.
that damage is personal. I mean, is permanent.
Yep.
And if you have genes that if you have genes that have to do with neuronal connectivity, you can do some environmental things, hopefully, that will enhance neuronal connectivity. And I think, you know, clearly in the anatomy of violence, I'm glad somebody brought that up. I think there's studies out of Japan that showed there was a decrease when they made sure that people had the prenatal and early childhood people had adequate omega-3 fatty acids. And the assumption was that enhanced neuronal connectivity in the forming the prefrontal cortex.
Before we have any more questions, Dr. Andy, I know we have your book on the screen. Do you want to take the time to discuss about your book? Some of the people in the chat was asking about it, and perhaps some other works or papers that are available to the public to read.
Well, it's kind of you to put the book up. The focus of the book was trying to create something that was brief and clear and gave people an understanding of the basic mechanisms that go into religious belief, and that they were everyday mechanisms that you and I use all the time. So the goal of the book was brevity, clarity, and to give people a tool when they got into discussions with believers about, you know, that we're starting to get a handle on the psychological mechanisms that go into religious belief. I viewed it as a kind of rhetorical weapon that people could have in their back pocket. In terms of other, I think there's been an explosion of books and articles on the excuse me, you know, on the basis, on the reasons that we believe, and if people want, I'll be happy to send them a list of some of the things that I think are accessible. People mention Michael Shermer has a. People mention Michael Shermer. He's got a good book.
Yep.
I particularly like John Wathay's book, The Illusion of God's Presence, because I think he's found the most crucial. Well, in my book, I talk about the attachment system, but he does a deeper dive on the attachment system, and I think his book is well worth it in terms of, again, why we believe and the importance of the early attachment system, the early childhood attachment system that is utilized in religious belief. But thank you for putting up the book. And it's available on Kindle. It's available on Audible, I believe.
Yeah, well, yeah, I read the book. It's a powerful tool to fight against pseudoisms and misinformation around religion. I use it all the time. So get y'all a copy. If I'm reading it, it's got to be something that's on par and put you in a good place in understanding these conversations, man. So, Andy, would you like to leave us with anything?
Well, just my gratitude. I'm very grateful for the invitation, for the opportunity. This one made me do a lot of work and made me learn some things that I had avoided.
Okay, all right. Well, we're at the end of the show. Appreciate everybody that came through, man. You know how we do it, man. If you was late coming, you was late coming. And he was on time, man. Always appreciate the community skeptics and the pseudo killers, man. We practice scientific literacy around here. It's a key component that I feel like has been missing in the African American community. We are susceptible to our beliefs, and I always had the feeling that African Americans in marginalized communities, based off of lack of infrastructure in certain places, we do not put enough value. Right? Let me say that we do not put enough value in science, and it's time to change for that. We seem to put more value in religion. That's just my take on it. I've always had religious conversations within my family, but to find a good, crispy, clean science book or magazine laying around wasn't happening. I had to be the first in my family to really push that forward, to push that dynamic forward. Man, I got a lot of noise in my background, but that's the family, it's the holidays, it is what it is, man. Did I get everybody? Did I get Cha in there? Did you get in there? Add Cha, did you get in there?
No, not yet.
Can you hear me? Can't hear you.
Can you hear me at all?
Can y'all hear him? I can barely hear it. Can y'all hear him?
I can hear him, but it's real low.
Mumbling.
I can't hear.
Any better now?
Yeah,
Yeah,
go ahead.
there you go.
Before we get out of here.
Yes. Good show. Just a couple of things I just wanted to say on the political front. The lead pipes under this current administration, Biden, in the Infrastructure Act, they passed a bill to, I think it should change out every lead pipe in the country. It's supposed to be like 60 billion. I think it went down to a lot lower than that with the negotiations between Republicans and Democrats. So just so people know on that. And then I was just trying to get, from my understanding, it seems like from what the professor was saying, or the psychiatrist was saying, that Murray is kind of making an argument for both IQ having a say and maybe environment. But the question becomes for humans, I feel like, I don't know what other people think, is that it's always more than one factor that leads to a human outcome of any kind.
Yeah.
And so I guess you would be arguing what percentage is IQ and what percent is nature, nurture, environment, and money, all this other stuff. So what do you guys think on that?
I don't know. I don't have a stance on that. I think we kind of talked. Didn't we kind of already answer that though? Did you answer that?
Just a
Andy?
little bit. He went into
So it's
nurture and nature.
it's nature nurture.
Right.
It's like the best analogy I ever heard was it's like computing the area of a rectangle. You have to have width, you have to have height. You can't find the area of a rectangle without both. And it's the same thing. You can't, to use your phrase, the human outcome, it's nature and nurture.
I think we all agree to that. Did
Yeah.
you do, or was it?
We absolutely do. We've
Yeah.
actually made that correction because a lot of people, like the missing link, they would come with the nurture versus nature and not understanding that component, that it's actually both. We've helped people better understand
And
that.
it shouldn't be seen as nature versus nurture. It's nature times nurture.
Exactly.
All right. So look, hey, that's the end of the conversation, man. I appreciate everybody that came through, man.
Thank you, Dr. Andy.
Yeah,
No,
appreciate
thank you all. No, I
Appreciate
really
you,
do. Many thanks. I hope everybody has a good 2025.
Yes,
we
Happy New
will.
Year to you and your family.
Happy New Year's, you and your
Same to you all.
family, and yeah, it's that good spirit, that good Christmas spirit. I'm playing.
Thank you, Dr. Andy.
Amen.
Some ammo in my back pocket.
I love cookies for Santa.
Good
About
Christmas spirit trapped in by the Christians.
Right.
That's funny.
Trapped.
Christmas is pagan though, so.
All right, appreciate you, Dr. Andy.
Dr. Andy, right?
Thank you very much.
All right, man. Peace.
Peace.
All right, so yeah, man, we're gonna have that after show, man. We can let the critics on, but the double talkers, I'm not playing the double talking game. If you don't have a clear stance what you're talking about, we're not doing that. I agree with, I don't agree, I agree, I don't agree, I double talk. I'm not doing it. Man, appreciate everybody, man, that came through, man. I'm gonna set up the after show, yo. We all the double talkers can double talk all they want, act like they didn't hear what they heard, they didn't hear what they heard. Yeah, we about to do that show where we will allow the double talkers that have they set. You're a double talker, you know who you are, man. Appreciate everybody that came through the panel, man. Y'all know what it is.
Bobby banger from the block, seen it all raw tough. Streets of Baltimore where survivors always rough. Joined the Marines fighting for a life he could save. But back in the hood, he felt like a runaway slave. Started an army, not of guns but of wisdom. I'm a rock squad, truth the anthem, we ain't just a God killer. Bobby banger on his path for the truth. Empower the people, give them wisdom as the proof. Black power rising, knowledge shines like a light. He's fighting for the future, ready to ignite. Selling drugs on the corner just to put food on plates, but deep in his heart, he knew he had greater fates. From the traps to the lab, he fights ignorance raw, teaching evolution while shaking up the law. The real black atheist is changing the game, waking up minds, never the same. God killer Bobby banger on his path for the truth, empower the
Man, yo, with that, man, go ahead and tune into the after show, man, where we let the double talkers in. I agree, I don't agree. They said they didn't say it, they did say it. With that, man, Black African Power, man. Appreciate all support, man. Appreciate all the chats, the cash apps, and man, just appreciate having informed conversations, man. Appreciate the super chats, and just appreciate the people joining into intelligent dialogue, man. Thank you for listening to the Community Skeptics, man. Tune into the Pseudo Killers. Like and subscribe, man. Let's get the subscriptions up. And with that, man, we out.